Half of all wild animals on Earth have been wiped out. You may have missed the news. It came from a scientific study mentioned on page 5 of last Wednesday's New York Times. You had to flip past the usual stories of Trump regime scandals, 4 jewelry advertisements, and an ode to a slain officer from the New York Police Department. Biological annihilation said to be underway. The article took up only as much space as a Sotheby's ad on the same page announcing jewelry sales in New York City. While biological annihilation sounds like an evil plot thought up by a Bond villain, the term actually comes from a peer-reviewed study in the prestigious Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, PNAS. The authors Gerardo Ceballos, Paul Ehrlich, and Rodolfo Dirzo use it to describe the ongoing destruction of local populations within different species. Due to the pressures of habitat destruction, pollution, and climate change, species are going extinct at 100 times the rate they normally would. The PNAS study shows that populations within species are disappearing much faster. The authors take data on 27,600 land-dwelling species and map it onto a grid with 22,000 boxes, each representing a 10,000 square kilometer area. They define a population as the number of individuals of a given species living in one of those areas. They discover that wildlife numbers have declined by as much as 50% since 1900. The direct killers are habitat conversion, climate disruption, overexploitation, toxification, species invasions, and disease. Billions of populations are already gone, they report. In other words, there have been billions of genocides in an endless mass murder of wild animal communities over the last century. In most of the world, the researchers find mammal populations have decreased by 70%. Graveyards could be filled with all the packs of wolves, colonies of bats, sloths of bears, and herds of giraffes slaughtered by the death machine of capitalism. Lion populations have declined by more than 40% since the 1990s. The number of cheetahs in the world has gone down to just 7,000. These dramatic results reinforce the findings of the 2016 Living Planet Index report, which said 60% of wildlife has been destroyed since 1970. It is not just non-humans facing extinctions. The authors write, humanity will eventually pay a very high price for the decimation of the only assemblage of life that we know of in the universe. On this topic, it is worth turning to a New York article everyone seems to be sharing. Humanity's End? When Will Climate Change Make the Earth Too Hot for Humans? Written by David Wallace Wells, a New York article asking this question has gone viral. Within days of its July 9th publication, the piece became the most widely read in the magazine's history. Instead of reporting on what scientists think is most likely to happen, Wallace Wells highlights the worst-case scenarios. He asks what could happen by 2100 if society does not take dramatic action to curtail runaway global warming. Temperatures could rise as high as 8 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, causing global agricultural yields to drop by 80 to 100%. It would mean the end of food. Even if temperatures rise only 4 degrees, Europe's 2003 heat wave that killed as many as 2,000 a day could become a normal summer. Melting Arctic ice could release trapped remnants of disappeared diseases, infecting humanity once again. It does not take much imagination to see how such results could lead to the disappearance of the whole human species. As food, water, and fuels get scarcer and scarcer, conflict could spread, and the probability of nuclear warfare would rise higher and higher, with the potential to take out not just humans, but most other life forms as well. Some critics have called Wallace Wells's article overly alarmist, saying that his scenarios are unlikely and not really worth thinking about. I disagree. His article is largely based on reports of mainstream bodies such as the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. There are actually a variety of scientists whose predictions make the IPCC's look downright conservative. As Wallace Wells himself writes, the IPCC does not fully take into account a range of global warming accelerators, including the melting of sunlight-reflecting Arctic ice, the release of methane contained in that ice, and the die-off of carbon-sequestering forests. The leading scientist, James Hansen, offers predictions more dire than some of those in the New York article. While Wallace Wells refers to a multi-meter sea level rise as a worst-case scenario, Hansen says that this amount, enough to submerge the world's coastal cities, could very well occur this century as a result of just a 2-degree temperature increase. Hansen finds that when the Earth was about that hot 120,000 years ago, sea levels were several meters above today's. At a 4-degree rise, the amount deemed likely by the IPCC, there could be a mass die-off of 90% of humanity, according to predictions made by the Tyndall Center for Climate Change's director, Kevin Anderson, and the Potsdam Institute's director, Hans-Joachim Schellnhuber. Less than 1 billion humans would survive. Wallace Wells does not mention these apocalyptic projections from the UK and Germany's preeminent climate scientists. The Climate Vulnerability Monitor estimates that 400,000 people currently die each year from global warming, most due to hunger and communicable diseases. The vast majority of them reside in the global south, making them unworthy victims in the eyes of presidents such as Obama and Trump, who have subsidized and protected climate-destroying factory farm and fossil fuel interests. There are far too many variables for anyone to know whether the already genocidal warming levels will increase enough to actually wipe out most humans. For one thing, researchers are studying risky geoengineering methods such as injecting aerosols into the atmosphere with a potential to stop some warming while creating a whole other set of catastrophes. The worst-case scenarios are worth paying attention to, not because they are certain or even likely, but because they are possible. A precautionary approach entails taking all reasonable action, geoengineering not being an example, to prevent their occurrence. Blame the humans or blame the rich. By suggesting that solutions will come from within the social system that caused the problem, both the PNAS study and the New York article fall flat when it comes to prescriptions. The PNAS report's authors, despite their solid grip on scientific matters, show a political naivety when they point to human overpopulation as an ultimate driver of wildlife's destruction. One of the authors, Paul Ehrlich, has a history of blaming ecological problems on poor communities in and from the global south. He is famous as the author of 1968's The Population Bomb, which called for strong government agencies to regulate the number of children being born. The book opens with a contempt-ridden description of a daily slum's residents. People thrusting their hands through the taxi window, begging. People defecating and urinating. People clinging to buses. People. Ehrlich has served on the board of the Federation for American Immigration Reform, a hate group falsely claiming that immigrants are a primary threat to America's environment. Ehrlich's misleading analysis distracts attention from the real enemy of nature, a phrase by eco-socialist Joel Koval. The real roots of ecological destruction are in domination, and particularly in the capitalist system, where a business must constantly grow or else risk getting squeezed out by competitors. The profit-driven ruling class must constantly search for new commodities to produce and new ecosystems to plunder. These billionaires, not slum dwellers or immigrants, are the ones responsible for the murder of Earth. It was recently calculated in the Carbon Majors report that just 100 companies are responsible for some 70% of global warming emissions since 1988. By Oxfam's estimate, the world's richest 10% produce half of all greenhouse gas pollution. The solution then must involve class struggle against the ultra-wealthy. Both the PNAS and New York pieces omit this reality. With an optimism about new technological fixes, Wallace Wells seems to think governments will voluntarily shift their course in an ecologically sound direction. He reports, climate scientists have a strange kind of faith. We will find a way to forestall radical warming, they say, because we must. Repeatedly, Wallace Wells uses the pronoun we to lump together all humans, rich and poor alike, into the same political category. If we stop burning fossil fuels, should we stay the present course? This lumping obscures key social antagonisms. In today's plutocratic world, a mere 5 people are as wealthy as 50% of humanity combined. We are not the problem, and no solution will come about unless the false unity implied by Wallace Wells's we is dismantled. The capitalists causing the crisis do not, and structurally cannot, care about their victims. To quote the industrial workers of the world, The working class and the employing class have nothing in common.